5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello and welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got George Bellshaw with me today, as you can see, to look back at the US Open quarterfinals and have a think about the US Open semifinals and see if we can't embarrass ourselves with a bit more predictioning. I had a very good review last week, or I can't remember exactly what week it was because I barely know what day it is, never mind what week it is. But as you know, I have a sort of self-imposed rule here, which is that if you leave a 5-star review, I will always read it out. And that is what Fraser did, saying, Ace, stellar pod, picked up during Wimbledon, good insight but not dull. Have been listening to some of the back catalogue while waiting for new eps. It's cracking hearing how wrong you get almost every prediction. George is my favourite. And then he signs off from Borge Gelshaw. Which is it's obviously a joke that he's like saying George is my favourite and you pretending to be you, but it's not. It's someone called Fraser. He doesn't know I can see his name.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know. There are quite a few like fantasy team names kind of mimicking me as well. I've got a bit of a. It seems like people really admire Calvin for his actual insight and views, and there's a small corner of the internet that's starting to just like mock me for being me and sit on the fence and getting things wrong. So that's good, I suppose.
I'm delighted that I can maintain my sort of voice of reason is how someone described me in a review recently, and I took that incredibly well. I was very pleased to have obtained that kind of status. Anyway, in my voice of reason, let's get away from this self-indulgent nonsense and actually talk about some tennis. We're recording this on Thursday, so in the aftermath of the last set of quarterfinals, in which Irina Sabalenka made it through to semifinals, as did Daniil Medvedev beating Andrei Rublev, who's now lost. That is 9 quarterfinals now for Andrei Rublev, I believe. And he has lost every single one of them. It scarcely seems believable. In the other 2 quarterfinals, we had Carlos Alcaraz beating Alexander Zverev in straight sets, and comfortably, you would say, Marketa Vondrashova, the Wimbledon champion, crashing out to Madison Keys 6-1, 6-4. Of those 4 results, George, all in straight sets, which one of them do you think is the most instructive or interesting?
That's quite a hard question, James. I'm not sure any of them really told me much. I don't know. I mean, I think we all know Madison Keys is one of those players who, on her day, can mix it with the best and can put people to the sword pretty well.
Can I just say that Martina Navratilova mentioned her name in a pre-tournament interview with me, and I internally laughed, and I was like, Madison Keys, yeah, right. Turns out Martina knows ball.
She's one of those players, though, Keys, that, in some ways, this should feel like, maybe that's quite an interesting result because, she's not necessarily gone that deep for a little while. But I actually think this is probably quite a Madison Keys tournament where I think she's got in a bit of a streak, played some decent stuff. I've still got my doubts about where exactly Vondrashova is in terms of the grand scale of things at the moment. But it's still a good result nonetheless. Do I think she's going to beat Sabalenka and follow up by beating Gauff or Mukova? No. That's my honest opinion.
Mukova.
And as Fraser, rightly pointed out, I'm often incredibly wrong. So cue Madison Keys to win the title now. But
can I just say, George, I think this is the first time I've spoken to you since Matteo Arnaldi beat Cam Norrie, which you categorically stated wouldn't happen.
I definitely did not categorically say it wouldn't happen. I would go back through that. I said, it was a winnable tie, which I then clarified what winnable means, meaning he should have a good chance of winning it, and then he got absolutely hammered. So I think that's on Norrie, not me, to be honest.
Okay.
And then on the men's side, Medvedev, generally speaking, has Rublev's number, I would say. So not learnt masses about that. I guess the Zverev result's just more annoying than anything from the perspective of we thought Sinner was the interesting part of that draw to potentially test Alcaraz properly, and then for Zverev to beat Sinner and then kind of flop against Alcaraz it sort of sums up the men's game in some ways at the minute, in that I don't see many players challenging Alcaraz and Djokovic, and we'll come in and talk about Alcaraz Medvedev in a bit, but right now we're probably sitting here thinking Alcaraz is going to win that semi-final. I think it might be more interesting in New York. I think Medvedev is very at home here, and I said that before the tournament, which Calvin poo-pooed and said he thought Medvedev might go out early, seeing as we're picking on predictions, and I thought he'd easily reach the semi-finals as has kind of proven the case. But I wouldn't say I've learnt too much about anyone from any of those results, really. I've probably had most of my convictions booted in further.
I think the Alcaraz Zverev one, yeah, as you say, it is almost the most disappointing because it had a bit of potential to be a decent match. And just reading the quotes, really, Zverev said he was in it for a set. Basically, he said he then started to struggle with a bit of an injury, which is kind of understandable because he had an absolutely epic battle with Yannick Sinner, who just keeps getting in epic battles. I sort of wonder whether Yannick Sinner is just going to be that guy. I was trying to think of someone the other day, who, I don't know, Leighton Hewitt or Marcus Bagdatis or Fabio.
Hard to say Andy Murray.
Yeah, to an extent. Just someone who always ends up in 5-setters. And, then it's a coin flip. But, yeah, there clearly was some fatigue on Zverev's side, and you'd kind of expect that. Look, I don't want Alexander Zverev at the top of the game. He's got multiple, pretty serious domestic abuse allegations against him. It's not great for the game when those go kind of unanswered, I suppose, or funnily enough, it reminds me of a case that's going on in France at the moment, which isn't the same crime. Basically, a guy who's just been called up to the rugby squad was convicted of racially motivated assault a couple of years ago, and he's appealing it. He admitted the assault, but is contesting the racially motivated element of it, and he has been found guilty, but he's appealing his conviction. And they've called him up to the World Cup squad, and the coach and the captain don't seem to have any problem with this, and the president is trying to just sort of make it go away. And I do think that sport, and it comes up when we talk about Mason Greenwood and everything that's gone with him in the last couple of months. I think sport has a responsibility to hold people to a much higher standard, and they can't just live and die by the innocent until proven guilty. Oh, he's appealing it. Oh, well, it's not been completely dealt with yet. And I think, with some of the Zverev stuff where investigations took an awful long time, where there was a lot of toing and froing, it's similarly damaging to the sport to have someone who's got all this stuff hanging over them doing so well. That said, Alexander Zverev also brings an interesting, and I'm not kind of reducing one by talking about the other, an interesting tennis element to the top 10, because I think he's a player unlike maybe any other. I've always thought of him as a bit of a Medvedev because he's quite reliant on that enormous serve. I guess he's a bit less resilient than Medvedev at the baseline. But he does provide another element, and he has been in Grand. I mean, he basically should have won a Grand Slam. No question. Actually, he should have won a Grand Slam, the US Open in 2020. So, am I glad he's back? No. Do I think it makes tennis a little bit more interesting, him playing begrudgingly? Yes. And I think, George, if there is anything to take away from that Alcaraz Zverev result, the fact that Zverev was there, I think, means he is back. And, I can't remember which Harry Potter film it ends with him contributing his back. That's basically how I feel about it at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, he must be, he was already kind of top 10 in the live ranking before this tournament, so I assume he's consolidated that pretty well. I mean, I'd expect him at the ATP finals, to be honest. I think he's playing some decent stuff on the whole, coming through.
He's
some
8th in the race at the moment.
Yeah. So, as long as that injury reference isn't anything too problematic. And, again, as you say, James, putting all the issues aside, he's done well from a physical and purely sporting perspective to put that injury behind him and kind of get over that. I think probably a large part of it was confidence of movement, as much as anything with an injury like that. He's done well to kind of get that behind him and starting playing some decent stuff. And we spoke a bit at the start of the year about whether the game had kind of passed him by. I think was Calvin's favourite phrase. Take a year out. What do you actually come back and find your way back in? And I don't think it necessarily has, but I think Alcaraz is punctuating that he is leaving everyone else behind. And I still, going into these final four, I still think there'll be a moment in the next year where he will leave Djokovic firmly behind. I do think that's going to happen. I think their matches are close at the minute, but I think Alcaraz should be winning them already, like in terms of the weapons and ability he's got. And the more he plays those matches, the more I sort of expect him to get on top. Even though Novak's obviously a brilliant match player, I'm expecting Alcaraz's improvement trajectory to kind of continue. So I think that's a worrying sign for the tour that he's killing players like Zverev that easily. And if he does it to Medvedev again, then you are a little bit worried about where the tour goes once Novak
Can I
drops
just
off.
raise an issue that I noticed? Someone pointed it out previously, and I noticed it particularly watching last night. Carlos Alcaraz has got a really long grunt, and particularly when he's hitting a big forehand, it is particularly long, and it often, goes from. And it made me think of the Djokovic hindrance at Wimbledon. It was Wimbledon, wasn't it? Yeah, which I have to say, and I think all right-minded people were like, it's a stone cold hindrance.
Yeah.
And I have to say, there are a couple of one Alcaraz winner in particular where he hit it down the line and went very early, and I think someone, if it wasn't Zverev, I think they might have got there. And there are a couple of times when he hits a big forehand, especially sort of later on in the point, where I'm just like, mate, that is I just think he needs to rein it in a little bit. And I think hopefully a good umpire would probably just lean down and go, fella, you're just a little bit close there. Just rein it in. But I think what's different is Djokovic doesn't really do it very often. And I think with Alcaraz, it's become a kind of trait of his game. Is those big yahs, and I'm just a bit worried it's going to happen at a really big moment.
Yeah, the frequency for me is what makes this call the most difficult thing, because you could pick out people Azarenka or Sabalenka. They are incredibly loud and they make quite often elongated long grunts, but they're doing it so consistently that actually it doesn't feel so targeted as when Djokovic, who doesn't do it very often, suddenly starts doing a massive grunt a large point after it. So, my kind of view is it would be good if they were eliminated more, full stop. But in lack of that world, players who do it more often will probably keep getting away with it more often.
Do you think? Interesting. I mean, I think before the tournament is out, I think we're going to have a big Carlos Alcaraz hindrance call. That's my prediction for a bust up.
I think it would need to be in a big match for it to be a.
Well, they're all big matches
memorable.
now, George.
They're all big matches, but I'm still yet to believe that. While I think Medvedev might be better at this one, I'm still yet to believe that's necessarily going to be a 5-set ding dong. Those calls are always more interesting when it's a tight match that feels like it turns it one way or another. So it feels like there's one match at the moment on paper where that could potentially happen, and that'd be Novak. Not to write off Ben Shelton, by the way, who's having a brilliant tournament, and picking that section we talked about TFO and Tommy Paul being the Americans we thought should come through, and he's taken them both out.
Well, yeah, it's a nice way to segue into Ben Shelton, George, who of course I interviewed, because I knew that this would be his tournament. So I interviewed him in the summer and then held it back because I knew that this was the time I would want. Anyway,
that's top work right there.
Let's say that's the truth. But it's interesting. I saw someone, and I wish I could credit this opinion, and I can't because it just was on a timeline somewhere and it's gone. But anyway, I remembered it. Might even be on Reddit. Someone pointing out that Denis Shapovalov had, maybe at Wimbledon, given Djokovic a bit of trouble, and that in terms of kind of game archetype, Shapovalov is not far off Novak Djokovic, Ben Shelton. I'm just trying to find the specific match they're talking about. Well, I mean, he's taken a set off him twice.
Yeah, but I remember the match. he did take the set, and he had a lot of chances in, I think, the second or the third set, where he basically brain farted on big points, and he was kind of smashing Djokovic off the court, and then missed some really easy kind of short court balls, which some will put down to Djokovic just making him play one more. Others will put down to just a lack of concentration in the kind of key moments. But yeah, the point still stands. They're both kind of quite high energy, fascinatingly large shot making players, if you like.
And lefties, and with a big first serve.
Yeah.
You know,
Shelton, was I right in saying that Shelton, he hit the fastest serve of the tournament, didn't he? I think he
twice
clocked something like 149.
He hit 2 149s in a.
I mean, that's quick.
Yeah, in a perfect game against Tommy Paul. It was. I mean, look, I've seen it up close at the French, and maybe we should get Henry Patton on to talk about trying to return it, because he was obviously playing doubles against him at the French. But like, it is serious. I mean, Calvin talks much better about it than either of us ever could, really, because of the technical stuff. But he talks about the big knee bend and the athleticism involved in it, and I think it's pretty hard to read as well. Like, I mean, it's doing 149 mile an hour. It probably doesn't matter if you can read it, but it is absurdly big. And I think, much as Djokovic is the second or maybe the best returner of all time, if someone with a serve like that has a day, one of those days for 2 or 2.5 hours, there's not a lot you can do about it. I think the challenge for Shelton, I don't know, and I kind of said this the other day, the challenge for him against Djokovic is just going to be the mental thing. It's just going to be the playing Djokovic. It's the first time he's played Djokovic, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that. But certainly the first time he's played him in the US Open, on Arthur Ashe. Like, the thing that, to counter myself, Shelton's looked bloody comfortable, and he looks like he loves being out there. And the big put the phone down celebration, which I don't totally understand the context of, because he's 15 years younger than me, and I'm now out of the range where I can understand these people. But he seems to really relish it, and I don't know why that is. He's just a remarkable character. And I want the Djokovic Alcaraz final. I think everyone does. But if it's the Alcaraz Shelton final, I think you look at that and go, hello. This is the next 15 years of us, isn't it? Shelton, Alcaraz?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased that Shelton's put together this kind of big run here, because actually his tour season's been a bit up and down, I would say. And I think,
hasn't won consecutive matches since the Australian Open before the US Open.
So, yeah, up and down is definitely
yeah,
right
literally.
to say that. So, we've all thought he's kind of a hugely talented, interesting, fascinating player with a lot of big shots. As you say, James, he is the sort of player who on paper could cause Novak problems, in terms of if he plays his game properly and goes a loose arm, hits big serves, takes things quickly, he's quick around the court, he's got everything on paper to cause Novak a lot of problems and kind of hit through him. It's just about, does he, you're saying playing him for the first time can be really challenging. It can work the other way. He doesn't have any scar tissue. He's not faced Novak enough times that he's going to get lured in. That doesn't often happen. I know we're all going to make faces about that.
It can, but it almost never does.
Well, yeah, I think Tsitsipas might have beaten Djokovic in one of his first 2 attempts, for example, and lost 10 in a row. I'm not saying it's a different kettle of fish at Grand Slams, but I think you've got more of a chance, and it is still a fairly slim chance either way, of upsetting Novak when he's not that comfortable. He doesn't really feel like he knows what to expect, and Shelton's kind of got that game. Maybe almost, I don't think they're exactly alike, but kind of, I think of Wawrinka quite often, that sort of explosive player who can take the racket out of your hands that Novak has traditionally sometimes not had an answer for. And if he catches him on one of those days, you never know. I still expect Novak to reach the final. I still expect Alcaraz to reach the final, and I still expect that to go for around 5 hours on Sunday night UK time. But we shall see. It could be an interesting Final Four. I think it's a good Final Four, isn't it? I mean, you can't really complain. You've got 2 young guys one guy who we still should be kicking around for another 5 years and one of the greats of the game. You can't ask for much more than that, I don't think.
And an American, which I think is really important. I know we've got two Americans in the women's semis as well, but for the millions of Americans who still have ESPN on their cable package, because this dispute between Spectrum and Disney is still going on over some sort of rate rise that is far too complicated. And I don't understand American cable at the best of times, but millions of people in America literally can't get ESPN on their telly, which at the beginning of the NFL season and the baseball season pinching point, like it's not funny, but quite remarkable.
Well, look, if the winners of these tournaments are Coco Gauff and Ben Shelton, I suspect that might be changing.
Yeah, might do some ratings that, I reckon. Let me ask for you let me ask for your predictions, George, for these two semis. Then I'm going to need scores, not scores, but in sets.
Yeah. I mean, I think Alcaraz and Djokovic are going to win the matches. I fancy Medvedev to make more of a fist of it, which I suppose isn't that hard given his previous effort. But I think these conditions suit him infinitely more than Wimbledon and probably any other court they've played on. I can't remember every court they've played on, but this is one where Medvedev feels very comfortable, and I think that is showing. Even though he had a bit of a tough time in the heat against Rublev, he's still mopping that up in straight sets, despite his kind of complaints of death, which I'm not downplaying, by the way. It did look pretty rough conditions. So I think he'll have to work for that, Alcaraz. But I think 4 sets, but I think it could be a long match and testing.
And Djokovic?
I think Djokovic probably wins in 3, to be honest. I hope I'm wrong and Shelton at least takes a set. But I'd expect Novak to kind of look after his own serve, win a tight tie break, maybe catch Shelton a bit cold in the second set when he's disappointed at losing the first, and just have that nous to kind of ride the match, even if it might be a tight straight set.
I was very close to the exact same prediction as you, George, but I think they're both going to be 4 sets. I think Shelton's going to nick one. Just usually tie breaks, I'd be like, yeah, Djokovic tie breaks City. But I think the serve is so big that he could potentially take it out of, because the whole thing about Djokovic in tie breaks, for anyone who's watched enough of him, is he goes into lockdown mode, as people often call it, where he doesn't miss ground strokes and hits good length but not great length, and just makes you do something and you get tight. I don't know how he does it. It's Jedi mind tricks, I'm sure of it. But he does. And I just think with Shelton, with the serve, he could stop. He's the only thing that could stop Djokovic doing that is hitting absolute bombs. And I think if he just gets on a rhythm, that might be that. But we'll see. Let's move on to the women's side. As I mentioned, the results from last night, yesterday, I can't really work out the times. Sabalenka beating what I'm reliably informed is Chung. I've been working on my Chinese pronunciations this week. All the people I used to think called Wang are in fact called Wong. I'm sure also because Chinese is such an intonation-based language, I'm still getting it wrong, but I'm doing my best. And Vondrousova beaten by Keys to set up a semi-final lineup that is French Open finalist Coco Gauff against French Open finalist Karolina Muchova, Australian Open champion Aryna Sabalenka against US Open finalist. Yes, yeah. I always get confused. Keys was the 2017 loss to Sloane Stephens, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I get confused between her and, is it Jen Brady who lost Naomi Osaka? And Danielle Collins. I get confused between Danielle Collins' Australian Open final and Madison Keys' US Open final. That's right.
Collins lost to Barty, I think.
Yes, that makes sense. Anyway, point being, we've got 4 Grand Slam finalists in the semi-finals of the US Open, which I think merits some praise. We give the women's game a hard time on here sometimes, and I think this is a proper semi-final line. It's not the one really any of us would have expected, but I think there's some serious I think there's some grit in this game.
Yeah, I mean, Sabalenka, to start with, the kind of easy narrative, I suppose, from her side is that this is a player who's always threatened to be the best women's player in the game. I remember some years ago on Osaka's debut kind of US Open win, she played Sabalenka in the fourth round, and that was billed as two players who could absolutely dominate the women's game going forward. And they played a fabulous match, which Osaka narrowly edged. And then Osaka kind of went on to this period of dominance on the hard courts. And Sabalenka, I wouldn't say didn't, but she took a different route. She's been very consistent at tour level. For all the criticisms we can level at many other players in the women's game, Sabalenka, broadly speaking, has been a top 5 player, top 8 player for the last 5 years, I would say, without looking closely. And what she's changed this year is just that extra bit of belief at the biggest events, and that's shown that she's reached the semi-finals of all Grand Slams. She's obviously won the Australian Open. She'll have feelings of regret about the French Open semi-finals, I'm sure. But she'll be world number 1 after this tournament, which is a good achievement in itself, and she's probably feeling pretty good about her chances of winning this from this position. As hopefully she should be, given she's played such good tennis all year. And it's nice to see. I think she's a good character. She's interesting. She plays a big hitting game. While I've maybe poked fun at her noises a bit earlier in the tournament, you do remember watching Sabalenka. She is a good player to go and watch. And I think the idea of a Sabalenka Gauff final would be a good one for her to be introduced to a big American audience, for example. Not that she's not introduced in some degrees, but Gauff in the US Open final will bring a lot more people than would otherwise be there. With the greatest respect to Mukova.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think Sabalenka's been a top player for 5 years, but she has been a top player for 3, certainly, and been a top 10 player for 4. But, the point I think probably stands. It's easy to forget, and I had to check, but she made a Wimbledon semi-final 2 years ago and was a set-up and basically chucked it away because, frankly, she bricked it against Pliskova. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wasn't
pretty. Neither was the final, by the way.
No, but as semi-finals goes, I do remember looking at that Pliskova-Sabalenka one and being, because obviously women's semi-finals is Thursday. I think they were first on. I did look at it and think I might go for quite a lot of drinks on Wednesday because I don't think I'm going to be getting there that early on Thursday. But anyway, that's by the by, just my unprofessionalism. But yeah, she has since made since that semi-final, including that semi-final, she's made, out of 9 Grand Slams, she's made at least a semi-final in 7 of them. Like, that is really, really top level consistency. And yeah, really, really hard to argue with, as you mentioned, George. It's also worth noting as well, by the way, she's won 2 Grand Slam doubles titles. I know she's basically stopped playing Grand Slam doubles, but she did have a doubles career out there as well. So let's not forget about doubles, George. It's important.
Always.
The Gauff Mukova match, I said this to Pippa yesterday, and I think we kind of agreed that it could be a really interesting little matchup with everything that Coco Gauff's done with her forehand, and that both she and Brad Gilbert insist nothing has changed, but the reality is it has. There is more racket head speed and more speed off the racket, so they've clearly worked on it. And I think Mukova is going to provide the perfect little challenge, just, slicing and dicing her way in there, really trying to sort of surgically pick out those potential errors in Gauff's game. But I don't know, maybe you think she'll just blow through her and it won't be a problem, George.
No, I think it'll be a good match. I agree with that analysis. I think Gauff definitely has weapons and athleticism on her side in this match, I would say. But I'm a huge fan of Mukova, and I think she's a good competitor and she'll stick around in there and make things difficult. And she's no stranger to upsetting big home favourites, beating Ash Barty famously at the Australian Open. I wouldn't expect her to be overawed, even though that crowd can be a particularly challenging one compared to others around the tour. So I think that'll be a good little match. I picked Gauff, obviously, in my fantasy team, and it was hard not to pick her given the form she was in coming into this tournament. I think it would be such a good result for Gauff to win this match. As much as I like with a US Open with a finalist who's American, with the stature of Gauff and the star power that comes with it. If this is the start, or more accurately, after Wimbledon has been the start of Coco Gauff's final light switch on moment in terms of crushing it at the elite level of the women's game, this could be the start of something very, very big and beautiful for women's tennis. And we've all had a bit of a downer on Gauff, I think, for the first 6 months of the year because it felt like this moment might not come, but it's within our grasp of excitement, which is often when women's tennis takes it away. So
sort of the opposite of the Al Pacino effect, just when I think I'm away, they pull me back in. Just when I think I'm in, they pull me away.
Yeah. I'd still probably fancy Sabalenka to win the tournament from here, and I'd probably rank Gauff as my second favourite. It does feel slightly like the stars could be aligned for Gauff. She's found a flow on home soil. I don't think she'll be massively phased by it, and things like Swiatek getting blown away by Ostapenko, then plays one of the worst matches of her. Actually, it probably isn't one of the worst matches of her life. Probably a fairly standard set of Ostapenko results, really. The fourth round and the quarterfinals. Things like that. It was the perfect sort of player to get rid of Swiatek for her, and then, but still got that potential massive hill to climb of Mukova and Sabalenka. I think sets the scene quite nicely for a Gauff finish.
Indeed. So your predictions, please, for these two semi-finals then, George, and in scores. Tricky, I know.
Yeah, tricky. I think Gauff Mukova's a 3-setter. I'm leaning probably more heart over head towards Gauff, but I'm not saying that with much confidence. I could see any result in that one, which, I suppose is the case with any tennis match and is very fence-sitting, but I do think this is a really tight one that will ebb and flow. And then I think Sabalenka beats Keys pretty comfortably, to be honest. I think Keys has that ceiling and has never quite done it in the biggest matches against the best players, or even not necessarily the best players in Sloane Stephens. Maybe a little bit harsh, but I'd expect Sabalenka to be too strong for her, so I would see that as a 6-4, 6-3, something like that.
Even all these years later, even after all the consistency I've just cited, I still find it hard to trust Aryna Sabalenka. I've just been hurt too many times before, and I always backed her to win Grand Slams, and when she finally won one, I wasn't on the Aryna Sabalenka train. And I just got something. Just got a feeling. So that...
You're going to put your money where your mouth is with your...
No, I'm going to say Sabalenka at 3. Because I think that's kind of me hedging my own gut instinct. I actually think Gauff will. I think it'll be a good challenge, and it might be like a close first set. But I actually think Gauff's got enough for Mukova, so that one in 2. But I am hoping for that Gauff Sabalenka. I think a weekend of Gauff Sabalenka and Alcaraz Djokovic is massive for tennis, and that's basically what we want to a certain extent. Is tennis?
That's where we're invested, isn't it? Really,
well,
to be honest, we want good finals, we want good matches, we want people to be interested in it, and we want people to listen to us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't say fairer than that, George. And on that note, I shall bid you adieu. Thank you very much for listening, as always. Make sure you go and leave us a review so I can read out your funny comments on air, because I mostly only do it for 5-star reviews. Thank you very much to everyone who's emailed in. Lots of feedback about the Sky Sports coverage of the US Open. Keep it coming. We will do maybe a big debrief at the end of the tournament when we've got kind of a full gamut of views. But most importantly, please do come back.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.